Hi, in this lesson we're going to take a look at the foods of Greece. Greece is a pretty remarkable place. As you look at the cuisine of Greece, however, you can't help but notice an abundance of fresh fruits and vegetables, an abundance of grains, legumes, a little bit of seafood, lamb, but simple preparations, and it's almost surprising how wonderful the food tastes. When you come to this country and you look at Mediterranean food sneaking onto menus, oftentimes it's labeled not as Mediterranean food, but New American cuisine. With one exception, and that is you go around the country and you can still find Greek restaurants, almost as if people are unwilling to marry Greek food with food from other areas. It takes the simplicity and cheapens it a little bit. There's a reason for that, I think, and the reason is simply this. People have become sort of distrustful of food in this country, where it comes from, how it's produced, how it's made, and what they're really after is food that they can trust. They're looking for an authentic food experience, and I think Greek food really addresses that need. As an example, I've got a quick little preparation here that I'd love to share with you. This is a soup that couldn't be simpler, 5 ingredients, and a simple preparation. This is called avgolemeno, an egg and lemon soup. So let me show you what we've got. Here I've got some chicken stock, and I made that stock from the bones that were left over after having roasted a chicken, and I cooked some rice in that chicken stock so that the rice would absorb the flavor of the chicken, but also the starch of the rice would begin thickening this broth and making it a little bit more viscous. I took some leftover chicken, and I'm going to add that chicken into our avgolemeno, our chicken soup. And we'll let that chicken warm up. I just shredded the chicken. Now, here, I've got some dolma, stuffed grape leaves. We made these earlier in a different lesson, and there is a little bit of braising liquid that came off of those that has a tremendous amount of flavor. And if you wanted to, you could add some of this braising liquid to your soup as well and repurpose it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So this I want to bring back up to a simmer, and while it comes to a simmer, we're going to make what the French anyways would call a liaison. We're going to bind this soup with eggs, and I've got 3 eggs here, and with lemon. And the yolks of the eggs will thicken slightly, almost as though this were a savory custard, and give us a beautiful yolk-colored yellow soup, but also a creamy, velvety texture. So we'll whip the eggs, and then for each egg, about a tablespoon of lemon juice. Now, if I were to take this mixture and put it right into that pot, here's what you could expect: scrambled eggs. The protein in the eggs would go in there and it would cook almost immediately, and you might have something akin to an egg drop soup. That's not what we want. We want actually a velvety cream soup or a creamy soup. And so what we need to do is temper the heat of that soup before it goes into these eggs. I'm going to take this hot broth and I'm just going to move it over here. And I'm going to introduce a little bit of hot broth into the eggs while I whisk it. What this will do is it will temper those eggs and get them used to the idea that they're going to be hot very, very soon. And how much liquid is enough liquid? Well, I would say once this becomes warm, then you are just about where you need to be. The soup can go back on the heat. And we're going to add this liaison, these eggs and lemon, back into the soup and turn the heat off. I don't want this to cook too aggressively, and certainly I don't want it to boil. I'm just going to keep stirring for just a minute or two. And what you'll notice is that the soup will first turn opaque, and then it will start to get a little bit velvety. and we can taste it just to make sure we're happy. If you look at the way it coats a spoon now, that's an indication of the fact that this has become more viscous. It doesn't require any more heat at this point. What I'd like to do is taste it and make sure I'm still happy with the flavor. Some people would quarrel with my putting black pepper into a white soup, but I'm a big fan of black pepper. And I think this is just about ready to serve. So, I've got a nice bowl. You know, start to finish, this soup took about 10-15 minutes. It goes very, very quickly, and I think that simplicity is one of the hallmarks of the food that you will see in Greece. Sometimes instead of rice, they'll use orzo. And just put a little bit of oregano on the top here. And our avgolemeno is done. So every one of the countries in the Mediterranean seems to have a small dish tradition. Things like tapas, or in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, meze, small dishes that you eat at the beginning of the meal. Greece is no exception to that. They have what they call mosetis. And when I was first learning about these, I asked a Greek chef to explain them to me. And he said to me, you know, we begin a meal with mosetis, and it's an expression of hospitality. And I thought to myself, well, that sounds an awful lot like appetizers. And so I said, appetizers, right? And he said, explain appetizers. And I said, we have small dishes that are fully flavored, brightly seasoned, brightly colored, and we eat them at the beginning of a meal to get our appetite revved up. And he said, that's not it at all. He said, if we're not hungry, we don't eat something to make ourselves hungry. We just wait and we eat later. Mosetis, he says, is an expression of hospitality. It's a way of gathering people around the table, making them feel welcome, and sharing an abundance. So I have two mosetis that I'd like to share with you. Interestingly enough, they're both called saganaki. And while that word seems to sound strangely Asian, it actually refers to an oven-proof dish that oftentimes these dishes are served in. Something very much like this right here. All right, let's get started. I have one saganaki that is shrimp-based. And so in this saute pan over here, I want to begin by sauteing some shrimp in olive oil. I'm not going to cook them all the way. I just want some of the savor of these shrimp to get into the pan, because afterwards I'm going to build a tomato sauce, sort of a spicy tomato sauce, right there in the same pan. So I'm going to start to cook them, and then I'll remove them. There's the oil creeping in the pan and just beginning to smoke a little bit. Okay, now that the shrimp have all turned color, I know that they're not done all the way through, but I'm going to take them out. And what you'll notice is that on the bottom of the pan is a good deal of glaze. This is the flavor of the shrimp concentrated and stuck to the pan. So in the same pan, a little bit more oil, and in goes onions. And the moisture from those onions will help soften the shrimp essence on the pan and allow me to scrape it up. Once the onions are translucent, then in goes a little bit of garlic. And I'll continue to cook that just until the garlic is aromatic. I don't want to brown it. I don't want it to burn. And I'm going to add tomatoes. And this is really a tomato sauce that I'm creating. Fresh tomatoes or canned tomatoes. If you use fresh, they should be peeled and seeded before they're chopped up. And by way of seasoning, a little bit of cayenne. You know, it shouldn't be overly hot, but it should have a little kick. And I've got some oregano here as well. And I'm going to make that sauce rich with a little bit of olive oil. So we're going to let that cook for 3 or 4 minutes, just until it gives up some liquid and becomes a little bit more sauce-like, a little bit firmer. If your shrimp have given off any liquid, make sure you don't pour that out. Instead, add it right to your sauce. And this should taste like a sauce in your mouth. There shouldn't be, you know, crunchy pieces of onion or raw tasting garlic. And we're going to add the shrimp back to this and coat them in this flavorful sauce. Now, at this point, the shrimp aren't completely cooked. They're close, but not completely cooked. As they come in contact with the hot sauce, they'll give up even a little bit more liquid. And I want to make sure that I'm happy with the flavor here. I think just a little bit of lemon juice to lift it up. And that portion is done. I'm going to take these shrimp, and what I want to do is mound them into this oven-proof dish. And it looks like I've got enough for one more dish's worth. I'm going to wipe this clean, and then the way that this is traditionally served is that when it's time for someone to eat this shrimp saganaki, they will put a little bit of feta cheese over the top. And then they'll run this under the broiler. And that last little bit of cooking will brown the cheese and will cook the shrimp the rest of the way, and it will come to the table bubbling and hot. And while the shrimp are delicious and the broiled cheese likewise, the juice that collects in the bottom is really the prize when this dish is all done. So there's one version of saganaki, and we'll run that under the broiler in a little bit. The next is a cheese saganaki, and it uses a type of cheese called keflateri. I have some here. Once there was a Greek chef here, and I asked him to translate what the word keflateri meant, and his answer to me was no surprise. He said, keflateri, that translates as cheese for saganaki. It's a special cheese that when you cook it does not melt, and that makes it distinctive among cheeses. And it allows us to take the cheese, and after we've dredged it in flour a little bit, we can saute it. And while it doesn't melt, it will get soft, it'll get very aromatic, and it will begin to brown on the outside. And if you've ever had a nice browned piece of cheese, maybe from the edge of a grilled cheese sandwich, this entire dish is exactly that. Adding a little bit of flour on this just helps guarantee that this does not stick to the pan. Knock off any excess flour, because that will just burn in the pan. And with the pan hot, I'm going to add olive oil. And then we're going to saute these pieces of cheese. Now, this goes very, very quickly. As I said earlier, this is a fairly firm cheese, this kefleteri. If you can't find this, there's a number of others that you can use. There's a Mexican cheese called panela that you can cook and it doesn't run. It doesn't melt and spread. So take a look. These are holding their shape very, very nicely. And when I turn them over, if you've ever been a child and you've ever enjoyed a grilled cheese sandwich, the look of these cheese slices has got to speak to you. Sometimes I use a non-stick pan. I mean, I'm not having any difficulty here, but think of it as insurance. Just briefly, we'll allow the other side to melt as well. And I'm going to add some olives to the pan. I just want to warm these up a little bit. And I'm going to add some oregano to the pan. And then once these are browned on the second side, I'm going to put them into the small cocotte or the oven-proof dish. I'm just going to shingle them a little bit. This cheese is relatively salty, a little bit gamey. Some people enjoy this cheese with honey drizzled over the top. This version that we're making here is more savory. I've had it also where you put capers and parsley and tomatoes over the top. Let's sprinkle on some of these cooked olives, warmed olives. And because this is a rich dish, I want to squeeze over some lemon juice as well. We'll get our shrimp saganaki out from under the broiler, and I'll show you that in just a second. So with the cheese saganaki, oftentimes what you will see is just before it leaves the kitchen, they'll pour a little bit of ouzo over the top, and then when it gets to the dining room and the hot cheese has made that ouzo more aromatic and more volatile, they'll just set a match to it. What I have here is a small pan of ouzo, and I'm going to pour some over the top, already flaming. The nice thing about this is it keeps the cheese soft. As it cools down, it will turn back into what it was earlier, which is a firm cheese. Let me give you just a little bit more. There we go. And then here is the saganaki out from underneath the broiler. You can see how beautifully the feta cheese browns. I'm going to put just a little bit of parsley over each of them. And there's nothing left to be said but for Opa! Next, I'd like to make a Greek dinner for you, something that'll look very familiar and yet at the same time be distinctively Greek. This is going to be a roasted chicken with a vegetable and a starch. And so let's get started and see if you can tease apart what it is that makes this a Greek meal. The chicken that I'm going to roast, I'm going to flavor it with a couple of different things that I think are typical in Greece. One would be garlic, lemon, olive oil, and oregano. So I've got a bird right here, and let me just set it on the cutting board. And just to get it ready, if there's any lumps of fat on the inside here, I'm going to take those out and just discard those. If there's a big long piece of skin back here by the neck, I'll take that off. So this chicken is sort of splayed out here on the board. When I am dealing with a piece of meat like this, a piece of poultry, I think it's handy to have a sense of the anatomy of it. So the wings are really the arms. This would be the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. This is where the head would be if it still had a head, the front, the spine, and then the legs, cute little knees and feet, so on and so forth. So first thing I want to do is take these arms or these wings and tuck them back just like this, like he's scratching his own back, just like that. And what that does is it gets them out of the way and keeps them tight to the body. Next, what I want to do is I want to season this bird inside and out with salt and pepper. And then I'm going to take oregano and inside and out as well, rub that. In fact, on the inside, I can take just a big bunch like this. I don't even need to chop it. Just tuck it inside. I'm going to do the same with a couple of bay leaves. And I'm going to chop a little bit of garlic, and we'll just rub that onto the outside of the meat. On the outside, on the inside. All right. Now, one of the challenges is if we were to roast this, because it's splayed out the way it is, it won't roast evenly. So I'm a big advocate of taking this and trying to create a uniform or a united whole by bringing this together. And the way to keep it this way is to truss it. So let me show you how to do that. I've got a little piece of twine here. This is butcher's twine. And I make it about as long as my wingspan, about 5 feet. And I'm going to take the middle of that twine, and I'm coming underneath the chicken on either side of what is the ankles. And I come up like this, and I cross the string, and then I capture those ankles and pull it taut, just like that. Then I take this string, and I can come right like that, and that creates a nice tight shape. But there's a challenge, and that is that the string puts a line on either side. So another alternative is to take the string that's on my left and run it across to the right through the crease between the leg and the breast, and I'll do the same thing here. And now I can hold it together, and it stretches that skin nice and tight. And then I'm going to flip the whole bird over, and I'm going to take these strings, and they should go over the top of the wings like that, and underneath this little remnant of the neck, and I'll just tie a knot. Every time I do this, I sing to myself a little song, over the wings and under the neck. To grandmother's house we go. And that reminds me exactly what I have to be doing here. And I'm going to cut the excess string, and you can see then that I've got a nice, tight, compact little chicken that will roast very evenly. I don't want to lose any of this goodness, and so we'll try and put it in there. And a little bit of olive oil over the top. And some lemon juice. And this chicken, marinated, if you will, or seasoned like this, could live very happily for 4 or 5 days in your refrigerator without you having to worry about it spoiling. The salt and the acid both create an unfriendly environment for bacteria. I'm going to see if I can't take that half a lemon and just put it on the inside. With that done, I'm going to put it onto a rack, and we'll take it over and pop it into the oven. All right, this chicken is going to roast in an oven that's preheated at about 450 degrees, and we'll leave it there until it begins to brown. You can turn it down then to about 400, 425, but start to finish, this should roast quickly. It'll be done in about 35 to 40 minutes. And you want to determine doneness by making sure that in the thickest part of the thigh, on the inside of the thigh, the meat has reached an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Anyhow, let me go ahead and pop this in the oven. And I have a chicken that's already roasted, and I'm going to pull it out, and you can see it's beautifully golden. I'm going to set it here, and we're going to let it rest underneath a piece of foil just so that the temperature can reduce the pressure inside the meat can subside and the juices flow back to where we want them to be. All right, so there's our bird. Now, while we're waiting for that to rest, I'm going to clean up here a little bit. Certainly whenever you're working with raw chicken, it's a good idea to clean well afterwards. So we're going to have two things, as I said, a vegetable and a starch. Let's start with the vegetable. I'm going to make something called horta. And horta at its simplest is wild greens that are boiled, and then they're allowed to cool. You squeeze them dry, and you dress them with olive oil and lemon juice. There's a great tradition in Greece of embracing wild greens. As an example, I had a Greek chef who came here, and I had bought some greens for him, but on the drive up the valley, he noticed wild mustard greens in the vineyard, and so he spent an hour or two out in the vineyard harvesting wild greens. What I have here is something called braising mix, and I can buy it like this, and the nice thing is it's a combination of tougher greens. So I have chard, I have kale, I've got radicchio, I've got beet greens, I've got black kale. I'm going to gather these all together and I'm going to boil them in salted water. So here's the water and we'll get some salt in there. I can get a tremendous variety here just by buying this braising mix. Before I put it in the water, just see how much greenery I have, because by the time it's cooked, it will be much reduced. So I still get the same nutrition, but it might surprise you how I can reduce this quantity down to something much, much smaller. Those are going to cook for, I would say, 3, 4, 5 minutes. It'll give us just enough time to put together a pasta salad. And that likely sounds pretty familiar as well. Okay, those are cooking nicely. Our pasta salad is going to be orzo. That's the pasta that mimics the shape of rice. And sort of in deference to the Mediterranean diet pyramid, I'm going to mix grains and legumes with one another and offer up a complete protein. So here's some lentils. This is one of the beans, the legumes, that was already in the Mediterranean before most of the beans that we know about came from the Americas. Remember, garbanzos, lentils, and fava beans were really all the beans that they had in the Mediterranean before the Columbian voyages. All right, already this has a wonderful, what I like to think of as a tweedy look. It has two different colors, and I'm going to add to that some roasted peppers. I'm going to add to that some green olives. I'm going to add some green onions. And already I have a really beautiful, colorful salad. The dressing that I'm going to put on it is not coming out of a bottle that I bought at the supermarket. It's much simpler than that. It is salt. It is pepper. It is olive oil, sort of a punchy vegetal olive oil. And just eyeball it, but we're looking for about 3 parts olive oil to 1 part vinegar, or in this case, lemon juice. And you could put herbs in here as well. I have some mint, but I'm also going to put mint into the horta. So I'm going to leave mint out of this salad, and in its place, I'm just going to put a little bit of chopped parsley. All right, that's beautiful. Let's just make sure we're happy with the way it tastes. It's remarkable how much vitality and freshness a good punchy olive oil brings to something as simple as a pasta salad. All right, let's look in on our greens. They are busily cooking away. Now, one of the things that you will learn in Greece if you have horta is oftentimes they cook the greens maybe a little further than you might be comfortable with. We tend to like greens that are barely cooked and still a little bit crunchy. And I think that's not the model that you will see in Greece. Our greens are tender enough, and I'm going to bring them to the sink. I've got a colander all set up, and we'll strain off all the water and capture the greens. And I want to cool those greens down just by splashing some cold water on them. And then just squeeze all of the excess liquid out. We don't want our horta to be watery, certainly. Now, you remember before that this bowl was full of greens, and now look where we're at. It's probably 1/6 the quantity, but all that nutrition, all those nutrient-dense greens are still there. So over we come. And I'm going to make sure to cut these greens up into bite-sized pieces. That's a good start. And into the bowl. I'm also going to add some mint. And as I said, I would not put mint in both the horta and the pasta salad, but one or the other I think is a nice idea. And so I'm going to put it here into the horta. We'll cut this mint into very thin ribbons. Olive oil. This is extra virgin olive oil. We're not talking about low budget olive oil here. This is good Greek oil. A little bit of salt and pepper. And then I love the idea of crumbling some feta in here. I love the way the cheese flavors it. I love the way the cheese kind of brightens this up. And I'm going to add some zucchini blossoms. I think they lend kind of a festive air to this dish. And let's toss it all together. Make sure that all the greens are coated with olive oil. The smell of that mint is great. All right. I'm going to clear the decks because it's almost supper time. First, on a big platter, I'm going to put the horta, and I want to put it around the edge. And then we have our orzo salad. Grains and legumes together in one dish, so a great source of vegetable proteins, fully flavored with olive oil and lemon and olives and roasted peppers. And I'm going to create just a little bed there. We'll move that forward. And finally, we've got our chicken. And if you'll recall, this was stuffed with oregano and lemon. And because it's trussed, we need to cut off the strings. There we are. And we'll make sure that all of those go. And when you think about the proportion of meat to starch, legume, and vegetables, this is pretty typical. A small amount of meat and a large amount of fresh fruits and vegetables, grains and legumes. There's our Sunday dinner in the style that you might expect to find in Greece.